So I'm going to dive into recommendations for action. And so basically we're going to take, how a formed assessment impacts appraisal and development and how this intersects with liability, and basically start to kind of dig into how do we get from informed appraisal to informed acquisition? Like, what are some actions that we can take that help us move towards being able to have these informed acquisitions of these abandoned mine lands? And basically, where we're at is we can't afford to overlook due diligence any longer. For anyone who lives in the Sierra Nevada, you know that now more than ever, people are interested in moving away from cities. COVID really, put pressure on people to rethink how they want to live and be in this world. And for many people, that's not being in a city, that's being in some place with more open space. And so as this is happening, we need to see this as an opportunity to really educate people so that we're not perpetuating this problem down the line. Because the further you kind of kick this can down the road where you have properties not being properly assessed, the values that properties are being purchased for, bought and sold for, being reflective of that, it just becomes harder to sort of undo the whole rhetoric around these abandoned mine lands. And I think it's really, really important to be clear that not all AMLs are egregiously contaminated. I mean, lava cap was a very, I think, scary example, but many, many of these lands are not contaminated like lava cap. Many are beautiful, wonderful opportunities to steward lands in the headwaters, and the headwaters need stewardship. These lands can have legacy impacts that are not something that individual people can't take on. And I think we just need to be really clear about that. And that's sort of the kind of the point, because we need informed assessment so that we can identify appropriately where problems exist so that we can build the confidence in public and private landowners and investors that we can buy these lands. There are remediation actions that can be taken, and AMLs can and should be acquired. So I'm just going to run quickly through. I'm a Zillow junkie. I don't know about any of the rest of you, but a quick perusal of Zillow in the gold country sort of demonstrates that AMLs are on the market, and they're not necessarily being marketed as such. And there's a willingness and demand to acquire these properties. So 180 acres in Nevada County, gorgeous waterfall. Do we assume there's mining hazards? Do we assume that the listed value of this property is, as it exists, or is this a theoretical clean property? If you're selling land and you don't know, you can't disclose what you don't know. And if you have an appraiser coming in and they're not qualified to evaluate AML hazards, well, they don't know either. Sometimes there's information in a watershed around a property where we know mining impacts have occurred with potential for liability. But there's no way of knowing for sure if a specific property in question has impacts or potential for liability without doing an informed assessment. And if and where information exists, it tends to be pretty disconnected from the property itself. So it's not recorded on the title, and for better or worse, it's generally not part of the disclosures. And without requirements that this information is included as part of the sale, you'd have to be a really, really savvy buyer. You would have to really know what you were looking at, or you'd have to be dealing with a very savvy and honest real estate agent or a very savvy and honest seller who was saying, here's what's here before, here might be chemical and physical hazards. They might impact the end use in this way, and that will impact liability in a different way. The cost to remediate might be this. So here's a beautiful property. For some buyers, an AML could be a very attractive land purchase. If you're coming from the city, a property that has a seasonal creek, a pond. Many people are very attracted to the look of hydraulic mine sites, for instance. They look very much like a Southwest sort of scene. They may not be so contaminated that there are issues. They may be just fine, and it could be just what someone is looking for. And with an informed assessment, a buyer could know for sure that this purchase didn't come with the risk of liability after their pending becomes sold and they've signed on, and now it's theirs and their responsibility. So AML Expertise Matters. Hire an appraiser with experience in evaluating mine impacted properties, because there's all these lands that need stewardship. In this Google Earth image, if you're looking at the top middle, you're essentially looking at the area that was in that previous Zillow listing. When you're looking downstream, you're seeing a white sort of ribbon. That is hydraulic mine debris that has come down from these upstream sites on Greenhorn Creek above Rollins Reservoir. In the bottom right-hand side, you're looking at a couple of hydraulic pit lakes. And this more or less same image is on the cover of this USGS report. This is not to say that the property that I showed you previously is in any way contaminated. It's just to say that there are these larger AML issues. And if we are doing proper informed assessment, then we will know what we're getting into when we buy these properties. And people may well and should well still decide to buy these properties. This is an absolutely beautiful property. I personally know that it is probably worth every penny. If you knew that buying this land and stewarding it would, require potential need for consideration of remediation actions, would you still be up for the purchase? Because if you're not, someone else is, a conservation-minded buyer, someone who's willing and has the expertise to invest in what actions might be required. Better appraisal practices are needed so that we are reflecting the unique aspects of AMLs. But if we have these better appraisal practices and we're reflecting these, we're basically supporting transparency in land transactions. And that helps everybody feel really confident that they know what they're signing up for. Because that's kind of the bottom line, right? We all have different capacities to sign up for buying these different lands depending on who we are. And if we know what we're signing up for and at what cost, then we have market accountability and market confidence that these transactions can take place. So what's needed to get us from here to there? Disclosure of assessment findings. These assessments that are done on the property with the owner's permission should become part of the disclosable record for the property. So that information is informing someone who's trying to make a decision about whether they have the capacity to take this on. We talked a lot about proper land valuation. We need new standards and protocols for appraising properties so that we're basically making sure that these properties are being sold based on an appropriate end use that's going to protect public health, and that's a realistic end use, that you actually can develop that property into a subdivision or a residential home. We need expertise in action. We need probably some new training and licensing requirements to ensure that both appraisers and real estate agents have the expertise to provide guidance on this, for parties who are interested in acquiring these lands. We've touched on it a few times, appraisers are not AML experts, but there are AML experts out there. There are engineers who can determine what an estimated remediation cleanup cost would be. And these end use scenarios need to be incorporated into how we're thinking about these land transactions. Carefully chosen buyer. Like I said, different people have different capacities to be up for these acquisitions. So when you're talking about a land acquisition, understanding who's acquiring the land and what their ability is to deal with things is really important. Public versus private have access to different expertise, different sources of funding to clean up these lands. Clarifying liability with purchase agreements that are structured to reflect basically the specific needs of each party is really important. Having permitting be informed so that local government planning and permitting basically is taking into account informed assessment. And then finally, having these, we're going to get to this next week really in depth, but having project designs that are based on these informed assessments so that basically whatever you're doing on that land, you're not exacerbating conditions. You're basically increasing liability if you're exacerbating conditions. And so how can our project designs be smart and avoid that? So policy actions. At the state and federal level, we can advocate that new training and licensing requirements be added to the uniform standards of professional appraisal practice, right? We can basically require that if folks are going to go out and appraise lands in the gold country, they know potentially what they're looking at and they know when they need to engage their team of multidisciplinary experts to make sure that that appraisal is reflecting a realistic, highest and best use. We can have at the state level regulations that basically require that information be disclosed, that there's an informed assessment of an AML, and that that's added to the title of impacted properties. Because if that information is added, then there's transparency. So if we're thinking back to Lava Cat Mine, if that, cleanup and abatement order had been included as part of that title transaction, then there would have been a better understanding about what the highest and best in use of that property could be and what it was actually worth. And then finally, at the local level, we can have cities and counties updating their general plans and maps to reflect AMLs. So that basically we're requiring informed assessment when we know these things, these impacts may or may not be present. And so where hazards are identified, the plan can outline how these hazards will be addressed and remediated, potentially as part of a permitting structure. So I know every place is different, but in Nevada County, if we look at our permitting structure, you pay for, if you want to do a residential development, you're going to pay for road improvements, you're going to pay for fire protection, you're going to pay a fee for the local schools. So if draw that out to its logical conclusion, should we be including fees for AMLs as part of the permit structure? If we're in the gold country, everyone's aware of it. People are paying in to basically make sure that these issues get addressed, because basically plainly spelling out the implications of inquiring AMLs, despite what it seems like, it increases market confidence because we're minimizing surprises. We're saying, here's what's here. Sometimes it's, bad, sometimes it's not. Everyone knows. Both public and private parties are able and willing to invest in buying, developing, and restoring these lands. They just want to know what they're getting into so that they can mobilize the right resources and make an informed decision as to whether they're the best person. So if we're transparent about these impacts and we recognize them and we discuss them, we're not burying our heads in the sand, we can basically increase the pace and scale of mine remediation, because we're just saying, okay, here's what's out here. We're all looking at it. We're all understanding it. Are you the best person for that piece of property? Do you have the ability to take that on? Does it just not matter to you because you just love it? I mean, one of those properties, if I had had the money to buy it, I would have bought it because I just love it. And there's probably many other people in that position. So I think we're going to head into some discussion now, because I know we're all very interested in hearing what your thoughts are, both on these actions for how we can connect the dots so that we are increasing investment and the pace and scale of mine remediation.